Hello, hello. Hey, yo, what's up? What's good? Bonjour. Welcome to the Any Given Runway show. I'm your host, Randall Carlton Brown. Any Given Runway celebrates the exploration of new cultures by highlighting some of the most artistic, athletic, tenacious, basically unique and interesting people in the world. Everyone has a story, each person a scholar. Welcome to Season 6. No lengthy preamble. Let's get right to it. We have a fantastic show for you today with a wonderful guest. Today we are joined by Rob Tonkin, and he's here to chat about his new book, a memoir featuring wild stories of trauma, truths, and transformation, appropriately titled Asshole. What if the life you built, the success, the status, the wealth was just a carefully crafted illusion, hiding the truth you refuse to face? In this unflinchingly honest memoir, a man born into privilege but starved of emotional connection takes readers on a California journey through ambition, excess, and the painful search for self-worth. Raised in a dysfunctional household, he spent his childhood yearning for love and validation only to chase approval in all the wrong places, first in the cool cliques of his youth, then in the seductive but empty world of entertainment. From rubbing shoulders with Hollywood icons to battling imposter syndrome, self-destruction, and the weight of his own unhealed wounds, Rob learned the hard way that no amount of wealth or popularity could mend a fractured soul. But through disciplined effort, self-reflection, reckoning with past mistakes, and embracing the uncomfortable truths about himself, he discovered something greater than success: authenticity. The book is told with sharp wit, brutal honesty, and a hard-earned sense of redemption. This memoir is a gripping testament to the resilience of human spirit. Rob is a California native who started DJing on the radio in Sacramento, California at 14 years old. He quickly rose to lead the marketing factory, producing a 2-decade-long Honda Civic tour, which included the Black Eyed Peas, Blink-182, and even One Direction. Driven by childhood trauma, he sacrificed his true self to achieve success. This book documents his self-destruction and eventual redemption, sharing hard-won insights into authentic living. This was a really fun book and a memoir of the best kind, one that is vulnerable. Rob takes you behind the scenes of the music biz and shares some fascinating and often hilarious stories of his nearly 4 decades in the business. The stories will give you FOMO, but the real star of the book is his spiritual transformation and emotional maturation. The stories are entertaining, but along the way you'll find yourself rooting for Rob as he becomes the man he wants to be. Really thrilled to have him on the show, so let's go ahead and bring him on. A man of many talents, but one that we can now call an author, Rob Tonkin. Let's learn.
So you actually read my book?
What do you mean you actually read my book? Are people interview you that don't read the book?
Absolutely. I mean, I
Oh,
think
that's horrible.
the majority of people who have interviewed me have not read my book. So it's kind of interesting to have somebody, because your questions, I could tell from the thing, I'm like, oh, he must have read my book.
I think that's despicable if someone's going to interview and not read the book personally, but that's neither here nor there.
I did not prepare my answers, so you'll ask the questions again, and I'm doing everything on the fly. That's just the way I go.
Well, let me give you an easy one to start. How's Ernest?
Oh, Ernest is good. Thank you.
Perhaps the most photogenic dog I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, he actually does have some medical issues that I'm dealing with, unfortunately, which happened after I finished the book. I don't know. We'll see how long Ernest is going to go. He's been going kind of downhill the last bit. Now
Well,
he's hobbling for some reason, and I have no idea why.
yeah, and to relate to you on that, my dog is 6 feet away from me, and today is the day we're putting him down. So
Oh
it's the
no!
same
Oh
type of thing.
no!
Yeah. So
I'm sorry.
same thing, same thing. It's just like how long, and he's been deteriorating. But yeah, we could talk about that on a different day. But I know you and I have so much to chat about, so we got a lot in common. And notwithstanding the fact that we both turned to pole vaulting as a way to get from the atypical sport, I know I turned to that because I could either jump far, jump high, or run fast, or run far. So I did that, and that's similar to you as well.
Right. You're the first person to ask that about that or to point that out.
Well, how
Um,
about this? How about this? If I just met you today on a plane and we sat down and we did the obligatory small talk and said, hey, well, what do you do? What the heck's your answer? Because what do you do? What have you done? You had such a dynamic life, dynamic career. What's your answer to that?
Well, today I would probably say, well, I wrote a book recently, but I'm essentially retired. I don't like that term very
Hmm.
much, but um, I do keep pretty busy every day. I don't know where the time goes. And I used to hear people, old people say that, oh, I'm very busy. I'd be like, well, I'd like to be that kind of busy. And then it just sort of happened.
Where does the satisfaction rank in being able to say that sentence? I just wrote a book compared to some of the other things you've accomplished in your life. That's a heck of a sentence. I just wrote a book. In fact, let me say it one more time. You just wrote a book.
Um, I haven't really sat with that very much. I mean, I know that I've had certain people say to me, wow, that's, awesome. And everybody gives me a congratulations. And for me, it's just kind of part of the process. It just, the way the book came about was a very natural progression. And even though I feel a bit like an imposter as an author, um, it it did happen pretty serendipitously, let's say.
Let's keep going on that because you've had so many incredible stories throughout your work, throughout your life. When was that initial genesis of, hey, wait a second, I've got some stories to tell. I have a voice. People want to hear about this. I should write a book. When did that begin?
It started, 3 to 4 years ago. Um, I uh, I was working with a therapist at the time, and we had done some very good work, maybe even longer than 4 years ago. I mean, the work I was doing with the therapist was ongoing, and I was doing EMDR. And for those that don't know it, it's kind of a trance-like state that the therapist sort of almost guides you through, but you're really going deep into particular memories, or specifically for me, it was for PTSD and going into traumatic moments in my life that I couldn't recall 100%. And by going into the wound, uh, and it's a very um, it's dramatic, in context. And for me, it was a great exercise, but you feel very drained afterwards. Anyway, not to get off track, some of those instances and the information derived from them instigated storytelling, and I started to write. And the therapist actually, that was another recommendation that she made, was to write about my feelings and write about my experiences. And oh, well, if you think of a story, go ahead and write it. So then I started sharing it with her, and then one thing kind of led to another. Then I got to a point where I shared it with a couple friends of mine who are writers, um, and one of them taught writing. And so then I decided to discuss it with him, and one of the guys, being that I had a lot of respect for his writing, and he had been in the publishing industry in magazines for and journalism for many years. His name's Thomas K. Arnold, and he's a San Diego journalist, but he's written for a lot of national publications as well, and he has an entertainment publication that he owns. And so I bounced it off of him, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to be honest. You're really not a very organized writer, but your storytelling is excellent." And so I took that, and I don't know, with any good challenge, I really dug in and I researched, what it would take to write a memoir. And, there were times where I thought, I'm not going to do this. And I did get distracted along the way, but I kept pushing. And when I do set my mind to something, generally I can accomplish it. Um, so yeah, you mentioned, I have done a lot of different things. And then I also made another realization in terms of authoring, just as a side note, that I had kind of been a writer my whole life and not really realized it. I had written as a disc jockey and as somebody working even at 14 or 15 in radio stations, I was writing liner cards, which are the uh, informational scripts that the disc jockeys would read on air. And so those helped the DJs. And then I had to really think and get my wordsmithing correct so that they wouldn't get tripped up when they were delivering the lines or using verbatim lines. And we had to highlight which ones were verbatim and which ones they could ad lib. And later, I wrote a lot of business letters. I had to communicate very clearly, and I had to be very accurate with my uh, offers when I was, working in that regard. And then I started my own company, and it got to the point where even for others, and but specifically for my own company, you're writing a business plan. Um, at some point I did that, and then, uh, but more frequently, I'm writing PowerPoints. And I'm writing these presentations, and you have a lot of information that has to be distilled into a 10-page PowerPoint. And you could fill a page with words, but really it's about an image usually, and then a few words. And it's about a feeling that you want to have somebody receive, and then you're leading them to a conclusion at the end through it's storytelling. And in marketing, a lot of the projects that I did were also storytelling. Okay, well, how are we going to introduce this, and what does it mean to someone, and what's the emotion that we're looking for? And so along the way, that was always part of my repertoire, and I just had to kind of uncork it for writing a book.
That was something I was thinking about as I was reading, is because with Apologies to James Brown, in your career, you've been the busiest man in show business. And I could tell that you had a lot of experience in writing, even though this is your first book. And I imagine that was you sitting back recording on an old DAT tape or something, even the public service announcements for Sacktown or something like that. I had that envision. You mentioned storytelling. That's our natural storytelling. And I think that's the strength of the book, the stories. In fact, I had FOMO on a recent drive to San Diego. I was thinking about, dang, how I wish I had gotten to go to some of the concerts, the ones that you staged in Mexico. I would love to have seen Rage Against the Machine there. That would have been incredible. But in terms of storytelling, how do you capture the honesty without crossing unnecessary boundaries? I do think authentic is a word that you've used to describe the book. I think it's very accurate, but it's definitely a tough balance, being honest, but maybe pushing the envelope too far or not enough.
I've had some feedback already from people. That's an interesting question. I mean, I really decided that I would put everything on paper. And I wrote almost 200,000 words originally. And there are many stories that are not included in the book that also happened that I think helped to shape me. Um, but I decided to include the ones that were the best in the overall um, throughput. And in order to sort of, I guess, to borrow a cliche, I was threading the needle so that you could carry a story through. Um, and I think they are all real, but you could punctuate each one with a smaller story or multiple stories along the way. And I've had some people say, "Well, why didn't you tell this story?" Or people that know me, or family say, "Wow, it's really hard to read about your father because I never saw him that way." Um, and I've had other people, tell me, wow, your relationship with your mother is really interesting. Or, um, I just needed to be honest. And I didn't really, I guess I'm at a point now where both of my parents are gone. So I'm not going to insult them unless they're looking down and reading the book. Um, but I had to put that aside, and I did not try to insult them. There are things that I probably would not have put out had they been around, because I just out of respect for them as people, I wouldn't do that. Um, but that was something that unlocked uh, part of what I was able to tell. Um, And there were things that were very painful to talk about, that are still painful to talk about. And I do have acceptance of just about everything in my life. And I got to a point where it's kind of, why does it matter? Uh, why do I need to worry about what other people think of me? It's really much more important what I think of myself. And that was part of writing this. There's a bit of a catharsis that's um, that drove the honesty and, like you say, authenticity, which
Yeah.
also can be very cliche in today's world. But for me, authenticity was the honesty, and being able to tell a story and not worry about what people think of me. Um, and I also did not. I mean, I'm writing a book, so I was aware that you don't want to lose a reader based on not liking the character that is the central protagonist, which
Yeah.
would be me. But I still had to be honest.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that are pretty self-deprecating.
You mentioned that this is something that kind of began in therapy, the catharsis of it, and recovery is a central theme of the book. And sharing past trauma, not typical for men. So during your healing, what were some of the watershed moments or specific interactions maybe with other people that assisted in processing these difficult emotions?
Usually hitting a wall on something, whether it was a relationship blowing up or um, loss of some business deal, or even a death. Yeah, the grieving moments, I think, were some of the things that were catalysts, and they helped. You grow from those experiences, and so I hit a lot of road markers along the way, and it's a very slow transformation. And I'm still going through it. I don't think it'll ever end. It's not like I've arrived at some, destination. I'm just probably living a healthier emotional life than I used to. I call it, I'm in a program, and we refer to it as emotional sobriety. People don't know what that is, but essentially what it is just making healthier emotional decisions. Uh, and we all need to soothe ourselves because we live in a painful world at times. And I've had many friends, and in fact myself, oh man, I need to smoke a joint, or I need to get high, or wow, and I've got to have a glass of wine when I get home and unwind. Um, or I need to hit the bar, I got to have a beer. Or hey, I'm on the golf course, so it's time to, hit the cart girl and get my drink on. Whatever. Everybody has their compulsion and their way to soothe themselves. Well, I chose a lot of those things which are not that healthy, and then other habits that are also not healthy. And so it's a lot of reprogramming along the way to be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to live a much healthier lifestyle and I want to change. So I'm going to try this and I'm going to try that. Um, yeah, you're right. A lot of guys do not focus on emotional health. But the first step for me was vulnerability, which is part of being authentic. Going back to that, it's not being afraid to be able to say what I need or want to say, and for fear of whatever. And vulnerability is a very powerful tool. People think it's a weakness, but it's actually a power. And it took me a long time to realize that.
Well, it's evident in the book, especially towards the latter, where you're making different choices and you have this emotional maturation, this spiritual evolution, moving towards activities like yoga. You could see there was a change. Can you tell me more about how the ACA 12-step program has affected your life?
ACA is is a program that's really possible for anyone. Um, I believe almost everyone qualifies for it. My therapist was very anxious for me to start any 12-step program. She really didn't specify which one. And I didn't feel that I was an alcoholic, and I mean, I may have been great for Marijuana Anonymous, and there's several others, there's Codependent, Coda, there's, multiple programs, Al-Anon. I had gone to some of those meetings in the past. Um, I had attended AA meetings to support past girlfriends and things. But in this case, I chose adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families based on the name. It fit me. Um, my mother was a functioning alcoholic, never someone who claimed the title or was aware of it, really. Uh, and I absolutely come from a dysfunctional family, but I think that almost sums up everyone. And then it focuses a lot on childhood trauma and on the inner child that lives within us. And, people hear that sort of talk and they think that's crazy talk. But I was already dealing with that in my therapy because my therapist was talking about my inner child and I would be even in EMDR speaking to that inner child. And somebody who's never done this probably is, like he's out to lunch. But I'm not out to lunch. It's a really successful psychological way of dealing with yourself. And so imagine you don't get the parenting that you really want. So you blame your parents your whole life. Oh, well, they did this to me and they did that to me. And that was my game.
Yeah.
And I was angry with them and I was angry with everyone until I put down that sword and I decided, no, that's not right. These people did everything they could, but they were carrying bags of generational trauma themselves that they didn't understand how to offload. And so they passed them forward so they didn't have to carry them, metaphorically.
Mhm.
And I received it, as did my siblings. And so what I had to do was take care of that child that got past that stuff and that programming. And so when something triggers me, I have to understand, how am I responding to that? Am I responding to that as a toddler that's upset because he can't communicate? Or am I responding as a middle school kid that's kind of angry and confused? Or am I responding as an angry teenager who's rebelling against the authority? And so you learn to recognize your reactions to things and then try to reprogram that into taking action instead of reaction.
Ability to choose our response. Viktor Frankl, Man Starts the Meaning, one of my favorite books. That's a big topic in that. And I appreciate that. That's your philosophy on life, because I think it's a tremendous outlook for anybody. And I admire that. So many wonderful stories, and you've had tremendous success in different areas of music, pretty much every area of music. And one thing's for certain is you were excelled at being able to handle all the turbulent ebbs and flows, because there was a lot. And success is going from one failure to another without a loss of enthusiasm. And you never waned when it comes to excitement for the next project. How did you maintain such a positive and optimistic attitude through all the turbulent times?
Well, that may be a bit of a facade. I absolutely created a persona. Down deep, I was in a lot of fear. And so when you're in sort of that fight or flight mode all the time, you're living in an anxious state. And so that was my form of survival. It was like, I cannot fail because if I fail, I'm going to get eaten. And so I was able to swim with the sharks and make my way in to some extent. I think I was oblivious of a lot of things. They say ignorance is bliss. Um, I did gain I began to gain empathy in my probably 30s. I didn't even know what empathy was before that. I really I had trouble accessing my own emotions. I was just they were kind of stuffed down inside of me, and I didn't know what I felt. And then there were times in my 40s and even into my 50s where I felt numb at times. I couldn't feel. Um, Now I'm an overfeeler. I'm an overthinker. And, I sometimes get angry with myself more than anyone else. Why did I say that to that person? I might have hurt their feelings. I'm overreacting, and, but at least I'm conscious of these things and I take responsibility for my actions now, much more so than I ever have. And the entire book is me doing that in a sense.
Well, if the facade was what spark was the spark plug for your work ethic, then I think it worked. You're using fear, you're channeling the fear into a positive. Another thing I noticed, other in addition to this amazing work ethic of yours, is that timing is such an important part of your life. It always seems like you were ahead of the curve. I mean, if you came back 10 years later, you might never have had the opportunity to DJ as a teenager because of all the bureaucracy that comes with a child working. Also, when it comes to if you maybe wanted to try to write a book at a different time, might have worked. And I think of the Honda Civic tour. You came by when that was not a thing. You were always ahead of the curve. Now, on the surface, I feel like that's a skill that can't be taught, like instinctual. How do you stay up to date with trends, but also ahead of the curve in such a fickle industry?
That's a good question. And that's interesting that you focused on that. I do know that quality of myself, and I have no idea. I don't know where it came from. I I would say that um, it's probably my appreciation of art more than anything else and culture. Um, and I think I got that mostly from my mom, who was really an artist at heart, but never maybe fully realized. Um, and so I think that she taught me in a strange way, and then some of it's just DNA. Um, you know, the things that were important to her uh, were very visual, always very visual. And so I also was very observant as a kid, and I remember that aspect. So I I also just do things on feel. I have a lot of feel for things. I can't really explain those things. I guess, I've heard songwriters say that when they write a song, they're, almost channeling. And then sometimes it happens in 10 minutes. And sure, I know that with brands and bands in particular, um, I did see that long before it became, commonplace. And I mean, when I first did it, that most bands were paranoid, especially in rock. We're not going to associate ourselves. It was kind of the Neil Young song, that I think it's called Rock in America, or I'm forgetting the title of the song, but he's basically got almost a protest song against sponsorship. And then I do remember at one point having conversations with his management about, potential brand association. So even somebody like that, um, who doesn't need it, and again, can it be cleverly enhanced? Can it enhance a an artist? I remember the Pop Mart tour from U2, going to that and feeling like, okay, well, essentially what they've done is that they've turned sponsorship upside down, and they used kind of the metaphor of the golden arches within their set, and it felt like a slap to sponsorship. Uh, Yet my feeling was they should have incorporated sponsorship into it, um, and they could have had a lot of fun with that, uh, and and it would have resonated with people. Because again, if you add value to anything, um, and maybe I'm a sellout in a sense, in saying all that, I don't know, but I don't think people care anymore because everything's sponsored. And I guess I saw that very early. And I also realized, I remember talking to the head of marketing for MCA Records at one point, and I said, "Well, what do you usually spend on, a typical album? What is your budget, your national advertising budget, marketing, all of it, sum total?" Well, outside of making a music video, maybe it was 100 to $150,000, unless you were a superstar, and then maybe it would be 500,000 or 1 million or whatever. And I thought to myself, wow, that's nothing. Like it's not a lot of money. When you're look at that time, I knew the ad budget for a brand like Heineken, for example, which was everywhere at one time as a beer in music, was, in the 40, $50 million a year category. Or you look at a super brand like a car company that spends 500 million or 1 billion in marketing in the United States only. Um, and here you're going to break through the clutter with 150 grand or $100,000. You have to be very creative. Um, and you are dealing with something that's a little different kind of thing. I hate calling music a product or an artist a product. I've always thought that was not a complimentary term. They used to call them product managers at record companies. And I think a marketing manager is fine, but I just, you're not, it, music is not a product to me. It's an art form. And so I'm a advertising marketing basis guy, and it still bothers me. So anyway, all got our little things. Hopefully I
Yeah.
answered the question and then some.
Yeah, you did. And you keep using the word music, and I think this is such a great book for anyone who loves music, anyone who wants to see behind the scenes of the music industry when it comes to marketing, especially how you took it from a non-existent platform as far as sponsoring concerts to something that's now ubiquitous. Really, my favorite thing about the book was hearing all about that. You better believe I Googled that Lisa in the Cult Jam jacket, had to see what that looked like. Love the stories that took place in Mexico. Love hearing about all the people you've worked with, from Paul McCartney to the Eagles. But there was one name. There was one name that I was like, he didn't work with this person, or maybe you have. I didn't hear one reference to Roy Orbison from the entire time.
I never did work with Roy Orbison.
Yeah,
However, I do
he
have,
slipped through the crack. Wow.
no, I do have a Roy Orbison story though. Um, so one of the first assignments I got when I moved to Los Angeles, I was working for a radio station, Pirate Radio,
Mm-hmm.
and Scott Shannon, one of my bosses, the DJ and program director of the radio station that came up with the concept for it, said, I'm going to hire you, and you're going to produce the first birthday party for Pirate Radio, and that'll be in March. And I was hired at the, tail end of 1989 and moved up to LA. So this party happened in 1990, and I think it was March 11th. I can't remember the exact date. Anyway, um, I had to organize a guest list. I recently realized that I had invited Ozzy Osbourne, and he was there. And I didn't get a picture with Ozzy, but I have a picture of Ozzy at that event. Anyway, uh, the only two names that he gave me as, oh yeah, I have a great photographer, he said. And of course, my job depended on it. So I didn't even trust my boss. I said, well, I will call this photographer, to myself, said to self. Um, and I'll decide whether I think he's the best or not. I don't know the guy and I want to make sure I can work with him because I really want to capture great photographs of this event. And at that time, there were no cell phones and people
Right.
didn't run around. And most of the time, you weren't allowed to bring a camera into a venue for an event, for a live concert or things like that. They were snuck in occasionally, but they were called bootleg recordings and that wasn't a permitted. And they made they made sure that that didn't happen. So um, I called the photographer and I said, listen, Scott says you're great, but my job's on the line. And, I know this is an unusual request, but I would like to accompany you or watch you work. And he said, oh, well, I'm going to the Roy Orbison memorial tribute concert.
Mm.
So you can join me. And I said, oh, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you can be my assistant. You'll just
Mm.
come as my assistant. I'll get you a credential. So I went to that show and I was in the pit at that show. I wish it would have been Roy Orbison singing,
Yes.
but it was all these other artists singing Roy Orbison songs. And so that, I have an appreciation for Roy Orbison, but never got to see him live. Um, but it is kind of a funny story. And then that photographer and I became very good friends, and he's photographed everyone and everything in entertainment ever
Yeah.
since. He's a
But
pretty famous photographer now.
the reason I asked, I was listening to your Spotify playlist on the way in, and it's a little bit of everything, from modern artists to Blink-182, even One Direction was on there, and Linda Ronstadt, of course, and She Sang Blue by You, which was a Robertson song. And of all the names on there, he was the one I didn't see, and that was actually the first concert I ever attended. So that's like, I wonder if he's
Well, lucky
that
you.
Roy.
It was nice talking with you. I appreciate your questions a lot, and I appreciate you reading my book. Thank you. I hope your viewers or listeners appreciate this too. Thank you, Randall.
Thanks, Rob. Wonderful meeting you. Wonderful meeting you.
Likewise, I appreciate it. Have a
All
good
right.
day. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Much appreciation to Rob. To pick up his book and find out more about Rob's life, visit his website, robtonkin.com. Everyone has a story, each person a scholar. Thank you for listening. Fill up that passport. I'll see you on the road. Aviento.